Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the wonderful world of payroll fraud. Thank you for your time to attend this webinar. I trust that you are going to find the content very interesting. Just a logistical arrangement. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions that you guys will have regarding this topic, and I just want to request that you can type your questions in the chat box, which you are welcome to do. Alternatively, you are welcome to take a picture of this screen with my contact details. And should you have any inquiries or anything, please feel free to contact me. Teresa from PaySpace will also post my contact details in the chat box at the end of the session. So yeah, don't worry that you won't be able to ask questions. Please, you can always phone me on my cell phone, send an email, and so forth. But yeah, let's get started. So first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what is payroll fraud? Payroll fraud is definitely not something that happens by accident. Payroll fraud is always an action that happens with intent. The person or persons intentionally plan what they want to do on the payroll to misappropriate payroll funds. So it's a calculated action where it is planned, it's thought through. It is really, in some matters I have investigated, the individuals claim that they did not know that it happened, which is not possible. And I'll explain that a bit later. So payroll fraud definitely is a crime that happens with intent. So I'm sure you guys have heard about ghost employees. That is the most common payroll fraud scheme that happens. So a ghost employee is where the individual that has access to the payroll system loads an employee that is not really an employee. There is individuals I came across that was so inventive that they actually created false employment contracts. So there was actually a file that matched the employee, but what we do is we ask the people to come and present themselves to us with the identity document and so forth. So at the end of the day, there will be a few left that doesn't have, which is not real employees. So it is not that they only load it, they can be very inventive, create false employee records that you will think, and that this happens especially in very big companies. It is very difficult to pick up a ghost employee in a big company if you do not check, for example, your new employees each month. You will miss it most definitely. Then for an individual to actually get the money to use, they have to change banking details on the payroll. Because the money must go from the payroll somewhere else. And that happens by changes of banking details. These individuals mostly have accounts at each bank in South Africa that you can think of. So they change the banking details on a regular basis so that the funds go into those accounts. I did have a matter where the individual actually used their family's banking details, the mother, the father, the sister, the brother. So you can just imagine for yourself that the whole family will be implicated, because if there's money going into your bank account that you did not expect to come in, you have to report that to the bank and say, listen, this money came into my account It is not my money, can we investigate? Then something that they also do is they pay old terminations. So a real employee will resign, they will be terminated on the payroll, and they leave it for about, say, 3 months. Mostly then people forget. Then they change the banking details to one of their banking details, and they start paying this termination. So if you do not check on the payroll, if there is old termination that's been paid, that is quite a problem. But things like overtime, variable payments that is paid in arrears, that is a legitimate payment to an old termination, but that will have to be substantiated by your supporting documents. Then a scheme that it doesn't happen that often, but I came across it, is where people increase variable payments, for example, overtime. So they and the employee will have an agreement. I will pay you more overtime, but as soon as you receive your salary, then you will give me X amount. That also happens with bonus payments. So it is very important for the payroll as well as finance departments to check with reports, clocking systems. Is the overtime that we are paying the true hours that was worked? Very important. Something that happens, also not that often, but it does happen, is where people report to finance false payroll information. This will happen when, say, for example, the finance manager does not have access to the payroll system, but the payroll individuals will provide this person with the reports on a monthly basis. So they actually don't know what they are signing. Then the people will go back to the payroll, change the figures after the report has been signed, and that is how the fraud slips through. There's quite a few other examples as well, but for the purpose of this session, this is the most important ones that you guys must focus on. And in order to misappropriate the funds of the payroll system, there must be a change in banking details. So very often, after fraud, payroll fraud is uncovered, which is mostly by accident. For example, the payroll administrator gets sick. That person cannot come into the office, and someone has to take over in order to have the payroll finalized for payment. Then in hindsight, people ask themselves, but how did we miss this? And this is where the fraud triangle comes in, and the one part is opportunity. So if your payroll system allows for someone with fraudulent tendencies, they will see that and they're going to take that opportunity because they will see that I won't really be caught out. And then another one that's very interesting for me is rationalization. So after people's been caught, they tend to make what they have done better. They tell you that this is why I've done this, this is why I stole the money, and they're usually very sorry. But as you remember from the first slide, it is an intentional action that you do when you commit payroll fraud. So I'm not very sympathetic when people try to explain, why they've done that. And then pressure. I found often that there's payroll fraud that is connected to people with addictions. They either have a gambling problem, or they are addicted to drugs, or any other addiction, that they have. And if your payroll is not secure, the people that has these tendencies, they will use them. And this is very important. And I think this is maybe a question that you are asking yourself now of how can we prevent payroll fraud from happening in our payroll system? This is a very, it's very summarized. It's much more involved than the purpose of this session to make you aware that there's payroll fraud out there. And most of the times I have to share that people or individuals in a company, they do not know that there's fraud on their payroll. Because people in a payroll department, it seems to me, are trusted, you know, to a lot of extent, which is not correct. Because your payroll is one of your biggest expenses each month. So you need to make sure that what is in that system and what is being paid out is true. And the sad and unfortunate thing of payroll fraud, when it's uncovered, it's already in the millions. And people, I also find that companies are reluctant to report payroll fraud because of their reputation, which you can understand. The court processes are also a very lengthy process, but you know, we need to stop these people from resigning, going to another company and doing exactly the same. I had a matter where I investigated an individual and I found them at 2 other companies as my career in fraud, you know, went on. I found them working at 2 other companies where they did exactly the same. So it is not something, you know, that someone do once and they stop. So how do we prevent payroll fraud? First of all, you will have to ensure that your segregation of duties is clearly defined. For your payroll administrators, your payroll manager, your head of department of payroll, it depends on what your structure looks like. But it's not only your payroll department, it is also your finance department. Payroll and finance, as well as HR, cannot operate separately. They need to work together to ensure that the payroll is not open to fraud possibilities. So segregation of duties, also it must be documented. A payroll administrator must know exactly what their duties are, as well as the other individuals. Then processes and procedures. This is where you will pick up payroll fraud. So if your process and procedures are not aligned to the segregation of duties, immediately you open up your payroll for fraud. So processes and procedures includes how do we capture payroll? How do we check payroll? How do we sign off payroll? And the final process of paying. Especially in big companies, it is a problem to check the whole payroll each month, but it is definitely worth your time to rather do that. Then access control. When you ensure that you've got proper segregation of duties and proper processes and procedures, then you can take your system's access control and you build it around that. So that your payroll administrators, for example, will only have capturing rights. It is recommendable that they do not have access to delete, to change any details on the payroll. Rather get a separate individual or administrator that's only responsible for changes. So access control is extremely important. I found at a lot of companies where I assisted either to investigate or to ensure that the processes and procedures are correct. The access control, if you export that or you look at it, then everyone has full access. That is not the purpose of access control. Then in payroll, it is really small checks that you guys can do to prevent anything slipping through the cracks. And the most important check for you to do is changes in banking details, because it must go from the payroll system to this individual's bank or different bank accounts. Because when we go to court, we have to prove that the money went from the payroll system into a bank account it was not supposed to go into. And that is our proof, is the change of banking details. That is again linked back to access control. So that when we print, for example, an audit trail, we can see that this individual on this day changed this employee's bank account from this to this. That is our proof in court. Something that happens that's very interesting, and I've seen it a few times, is where people get the payroll to be signed off, and just before they pay, they change the banking details, they export the payment file, it's imported into the bank for payment, and immediately on the payroll system, they change it back. So that's the next one. When you print a report that says duplicate banking details, you will not pick up that change because there will be no duplicate. It is back to the banking detail it was. So very important. Audit trails will show you changes on the payroll system. And then an important report, for example, to have is payments to old terminations, because that is not something that you will consciously look for each month. But if you've got a report that can show you that this employee left 3 or 4 months ago, all of a sudden they're getting a payment. Can it be overtime? Can it be money we owed this individual? And if not, then there's a problem. And your old termination and your change in banking details will usually align. And then something that I see do not happen that often, and this is crucial. It is that you must always reconcile your bank statement after you have paid salaries back to your payroll system, so that if there is any changes, you can immediately address it. So it takes a lot of time, especially if you're a big company, but it is worth your while. And there's something I always tell my clients is that in payroll, it's the small changes that you make that makes a big difference. If you do small checks each month, then you will pick up if you've got payroll fraud. So I know this is, I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, and I'm sure I have maybe get your thought processes going with payroll fraud. There's so much to say about it, and I'm not sure, maybe there's some of you that is attending that actually experience this. It's not something nice that happens, but for me, as an attorney, it is very important to prosecute these people, because if we can get them to have a criminal record and they want to go and work at another place where they will most definitely again commit payroll fraud, their criminal record will keep them from being employed. That is very important. The National Prosecuting Authority, they are responsible for prosecuting matters with the Commercial Crimes Unit, and it's important, especially in payroll fraud, it is a subject matter in court that people are not used to. So it is very important to have your experts, like me, for example. I've testified in many court cases as expert witness, because you have to lead the court to understand what happens. And payroll fraud is a serious crime. You can get up to 15 years if you commit this crime. And the courts, together with the Commercial Crimes Unit, they take fraud in this country very seriously. And I'm just going to end off by saying that there is an act that you have to comply with, the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. If you are attending and you are part of the directors or the board, or you're in a management position, I want to make you aware that if you've got fraud in your company of 100,000 Rand or more, according to the Act, you've got the duty to report it to the police. If it comes out at a later stage and you were aware that there was fraud, you will also be prosecuted. So I'm very passionate about payroll fraud. So yeah, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, so you're really welcome to let Teresa from PaySpace know. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this small tip of the iceberg, what we call payroll fraud, and I do hope that you enjoy your day.